Howdy folks, this is Father Dougal 9000 here, and welcome to another episode of Dougal's Game Finish Chronicles, a series where I talk about the games I've played and beaten as part of the Game Finish Challenge as featured on the Hardcore Gaming 101 forum. Before we start, I have a little update to make. By the time this video will be posted, I'll have started doing my semester of college. Now, it's only one class per week, but I'd like to make sure that I have the time to work on assignments and such, so there's a fair chance I'll be working on these with less regularity than I've managed up until now. Now, that might only make a slight shift, given the overall low effort I want to put into this series, but still, just so you know, these might be coming out not as weekly, maybe week and a halfly? Pseudo-fortnightly? I have no idea if there's actually a term to describe that particular span of time, but, well, now you know. And now, let's get into discussing today's games, eh? These games were originally logged from the 8th to the 15th of February, 2021. Mythbearer for the PC, Windows, whichever of those two works. So this is a pretty cool top-down action RPG of sorts designed by J.C. Bailey, where you fight enemies by going right up to them and clicking on them. You deal some damage, they deal some in return, so the central idea behind the game is to explore and get more powerful through the usual means of leveling up, finding better equipment, and the like. It's a fairly wide-open adventure, with the ability to encounter many locations out of the intended order, and plenty of places to explore if you're feeling a bit stuck where you currently are. Because of how generally relaxed the gameplay is, it's one of those things where I can happily chip away at it while listening to podcasts or music. And I also decided to listen to other things because of how short the music loops are. Now, the tracks themselves are fairly well composed, and I particularly dig how their arrangements remind me of the old GXSCC MIDI player, which is a thing that you could put MIDIs into and it'll give you 8-bit-ish approximations of the music by using various sound waves associated with that era. However, the music here lasts about 2 to 4 bars, or 10 seconds at the longest, which makes traversing the world very, very tedious after a while. All in all, I'd defo say it's a game worth the couple of bucks it costs, especially with that New Game Plus mode and a secret endgame area that you can only reach by not dying, so there's plenty to keep folks coming back. And if this grabs your interest, J.C. Bailey's also got a couple of other projects of a similar vein on his itch.io page. There's Deep Rune, a very open-ended side-scrolling spiritual successor to this with multiple builds. Quite tricky, I couldn't actually complete it. There's Holyfield, which is a top-down action RPG inspired by the Kingsfield games that I'll talk about in a couple videos' time. And an upcoming project called Forsaken Return, another action RPG that is currently in the works but is planned to be out sometime by April as of the making of this video, so here's hoping that's pretty cool as well. Super Mario 64 DS for the Nintendo DS. This one's kinda special for me. I first played this one on my sister's DS back in 2008, and it was the first DS game I really clicked with. I wasn't a Mario guy then, and I'm still not really, but this is the only main Mario game that I had felt any affection for. It's also a game I have struggled over the years to complete. I think I might have attempted well over a dozen playthroughs since getting that copy from my sister in 2012, and yet I could never make it past more than 50, 60 stars, 70 if I was particularly lucky. Last time I seriously tried to beat it must have been back in 2015, and that was a rather painful ordeal that really killed my enjoyment of the game. It also resulted in a not very good video review where I use the "this video game hasn't aged well" bollocks. That kind of thing never goes well. However, I decided that since I'm doing this challenge, I might as well give it one last shot, with the simple goal that I get the 80 stars needed to fight the final boss. However, it didn't matter what I did to get those stars, it only mattered that I got those stars at all. With that acting as my starting point, I ended up enjoying and discovering a lot more of the game than I had ever done. There are notable areas of stages I never knew existed, stars that I could grab by poking at things placed conspicuously enough to attract my attention, and there's even a bunch of hidden levels, some of which are exclusive to the DS remake, that I stumbled across for the very first time. It was honestly really exciting, and so cool that despite the ubiquity of Mario 64, the groundbreaking, game-changing 3D platformer video game, that there's still so much of it that I've yet to discover. Playing it on the go, one thought that occurred to me was how this might have inspired the direction that Mario Odyssey took. Being made for the Switch, something that you could play entirely on the go if you want to, Odyssey had to be designed in such a way that a player could make any amount of progress, even if they only had a couple of minutes to spare. With 64, it really stood out to me how often and how quickly you could collect stars, whether you were messing around or knew exactly what you were doing, and I'm thinking that kind of free-form design not seen in the other 3D Mario games was what encouraged the team to return to it and revamp it for Odyssey. Now, something I've often heard criticized about Odyssey is how every goal, no matter the challenge or complexity, is treated with the same basic reward. You can get a moon for doing a really hard platforming gauntlet, or for slamming your butt on that patch of grass over there. It can make trying anything particularly lengthy feel too worthless, and risks having the act of collecting moons come off as tedious when there's so many to get. In hindsight, I do wonder if using 64's interpretation of this might have fended off those criticisms, at least to some extent, because all stars require some amount of time and challenge to grab, but plenty of them are easy enough to do that you can easily get a star in 3 minutes once you got a handle on things. I'm not saying adopting 64's general difficulty would have made Odyssey a universally better game. They just have different priorities, and they do things differently enough that folks will prefer one over the other, and both are perfectly grand. Either way, I'm just really pleased to have finally beaten Mario 64, and I'm happy to say that yes, as the people say, it is a rad feckin' video game. I'd recommend it through whatever console or means that interests you, though probably not the Switch version because of that whole limited release, now you have to pay stupid amounts of money to get a bollocks sawed-off Nintendo. You're better off just grabbing the DS remake or the original in whatever way is most convenient to you, whether that's buying a used copy or, well... Yahar, me mates, we've got an old video game to grab off the internet. Fly the skull and crossbones of piracy, har! Etc. The Firemen, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The Firemen is a very cool action game where you play as a fireman and you have to hose your way through a burning building to put the fire out, accompanied by a very competent AI-controlled partner who acts as crowd control by axing out nearby fires and opening up doors. The game only lasts about an hour with its 6 stages, but it manages to get a lot of mileage out of its various ideas. During each stage is a different feel and vibe, while building on the basic ideas introduced from the start in a way that feels very intuitive and deliberate. Oddly, the way it's paced reminds me a lot of something you'd see from the late 2000s, early 10s, those more cinematic linear games, where the focus isn't so much on the player expressing themselves through the mechanics, but showing off cool set pieces and getting the player to overcome them. There aren't alternate routes to find, despite the floor maps initially suggesting some degree of non-linearity, and you don't have any items to find beyond water bombs to help you out in a jam, and people to rescue who partially restore your health. That does make replaying the game feel somewhat limited, at least in comparison to the kind of games that I prefer, where you have a lot of options in what you do and how you go about doing them, but I don't mind here because the core game is so solid. Despite the Super Nintendo's library often being considered one of the greatest collections of games ever, I don't have any personal passion for them the way many other people do, hence why I haven't written about any Super Nintendo games up until just now, nor have I really covered them on my Hardcore Gaming 101 articles apart from one or two requested games. However, I can say that the Firemen is a game I'm very much passionate for, and it's now one of my favorite games for the system. As an aside, I beat the game on beginner mode. The only notable difference from playing it on normal is that you start with 3 bombs instead of 1, and you take slightly less damage. Otherwise, you can play the whole game, and the challenge is otherwise pretty much the same, though you won't be able to see your playtime or the end credits. I'm bringing this up mainly because nobody seems to have discussed the differences between the two difficulties much, at least as far as I could find, and that could just be the usual ignorance, who knows. But now you know, so hooray! And with that, we've wrapped up another episode of the series. I hope that you enjoyed watching, and that you'll tune in for the next video, whenever that'll be posted. Thank you so much, and until we meet again, have a wonderful day.